You think you know yourself, but your brain is running a different story beneath your awareness. Every single day, you're living according to patterns that were carved into your neural tissue years ago, patterns you never consciously chose, patterns you might not even recognize if someone pointed them out to you. And the most dangerous part? The very mechanisms that help you navigate the world, the attractor states in your brain that create stability and allow you to function, these same mechanisms are hiding the truth from you. They're showing you a version of reality that feels absolutely real, completely obvious, undeniably true, but it's filtered, edited, constructed to keep you comfortable, to keep you safe, to keep you exactly where you are. Before we start, if you genuinely enjoy these videos, consider subscribing to our channel and comment what city and time you're watching from. I'm really curious where everyone is tuning in from. I spent decades studying the olfactory bulb in rabbits, watching how chaos and order dance together in neural tissue, and what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about the brain. See, most people think the brain is like a computer, processing inputs and producing outputs in some linear, mechanical way. But that's not what I saw under the microscope. What I saw was something far more dynamic, far more alive. I saw neural networks that existed in chaotic states until the moment of recognition, and then suddenly, like a whirlpool forming in rushing water, they would snap into coherent patterns. Attractor states, organized islands of activity in a sea of chaos. And here's what kept me up at night. If this is how we recognize smells, if this is how we make sense of sensory information, then what else is our brain organizing for us without our knowledge? What stories is it creating? What truths is it hiding? Because the brain doesn't just process reality, it constructs it. And in that construction, in that necessary fortial, filtering and organizing, things get left out. Important things, true things, things about who you really are, what you really want, what you're really afraid of. There's a little sign, a subtle pattern that shows up when you're hiding something from yourself. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but once you learn to recognize it, you'll see it everywhere. You'll see it in the way you talk about certain topics, always circling but never landing. You'll see it in the decisions you make, always choosing the familiar path even when you claim to want change. You'll see it in your emotional reactions, disproportionate responses to small triggers that point to something deeper, something you haven't looked at directly. The sign is this: repetition without awareness. You keep ending up in the same situations, feeling the same frustrations, having the same arguments, facing the same obstacles, but you genuinely don't see the pattern. Your brain has organized your experience into an attractor state, a stable configuration that feels like just the way things are, just who you are, just how life is. And from inside that state, you can't see it. You're like a fish asking what water is. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking this sounds abstract, theoretical, maybe even a little paranoid. Why would my own brain hide things from me? Aren't I the one in charge here? And that's exactly the misconception I want to address today. You are not separate from your brain. You are not a little pilot sitting in your head, operating your brain like a machine. You are the patterns of neural activity themselves. Your consciousness, your sense of self, your experience of reality, all of it emerges from these dynamic, ever-shifting patterns of electrochemical activity. And these patterns have one primary job: to help you survive and navigate your environment. Not to show you the truth, not to make you happy, not to help you reach your potential, just to keep you alive and functioning. And here's the thing about survival. Sometimes the truth is destabilizing. Sometimes, Acknowledging what you really feel or what you really want or what really happened would require you to change, to leave behind familiar territory, to venture into chaos. And your brain, your beautiful, protective, pattern-seeking brain, doesn't like chaos. It likes stability. It likes predictability. It likes attractor states. So it hides things from you, not maliciously, not consciously, but automatically, elegantly, through the very mechanisms that allow you to function. What I want to do today is help you understand how this works, why it happens, and most importantly, how you can begin to see what you've been hiding from yourself. Because here's the profound truth I've come to understand after a lifetime of studying neural dynamics. You cannot change what you cannot see. And you cannot see what your attractor states have organized out of view. But you can learn to recognize the signs. You can learn to feel the edges of your blind spots. You can learn to invite a little bit of chaos back into your system, just enough to allow new patterns to form, new ways of seeing, new versions of yourself to emerge. This isn't about judging yourself or feeling ashamed of your self-deception. This is about understanding that self-deception is a feature of how brains work, not a personal failing. And once you understand the mechanism, you can work with it instead of being controlled by it. So let me take you on a journey today. We're going to explore how your brain creates your reality, how attractor states keep you stuck, and how you can gently, compassionately begin to see yourself more clearly. We're going to look at stories from my own life and from the lives of people I've known, moments when the veil lifted and something hidden became visible. And we're going to talk about practical ways you can apply this understanding in your daily life. Small experiments you can run to test the boundaries of your own awareness. By the end of this conversation, my hope is that you'll have a new lens through which to view your experience, a new curiosity about your own mind, and a new sense of possibility about who you might become when you stop hiding from yourself. Let me tell you about a time when I came face to face with my own self-deception in a way that shook me to my core. It was the early 1980s, and I was deep into my research on the olfactory system. I'd been working with rabbits, recording the electrical activity in their olfactory bulbs as they encountered different smells, and I was seeing these remarkable patterns. Chaos, then suddenly coherence. Random neural firing, then suddenly synchronized oscillations. It was beautiful. It was elegant. And I was convinced I understood what it meant. I published papers. I gave talks. I developed a theory about how the brain uses chaos to enable flexible pattern recognition. And I was so certain, so confident in my interpretation of the data. I remember standing at conferences, defending my position, feeling that absolute conviction that comes when everything makes sense, when all the pieces fit together. But there was something I wasn't seeing. A different interpretation of the same data that was right there, hiding in plain sight. It took a young postdoc in my lab to point it out. She was brilliant, fresh out of her PhD, full of energy and unafraid to question established ideas. She came into my office one afternoon with a stack of our recordings and she said, "Walter, what if we're looking at this backwards? What if the chaos isn't a starting state that gets organized into patterns? What if the chaos itself is the pattern and what we're calling coherence is actually a reduction, a constraint, a limitation?" I remember my immediate reaction, defensive, dismissive. I had reasons, good scientific reasons, why her interpretation didn't fit. I explained them to her, patiently at first, then with growing frustration as she persisted. I remember feeling annoyed that she couldn't see what was so obvious to me. And then I went home that night, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Her question had gotten under my skin, And as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't defending the data. I was defending my investment in a particular interpretation. I had built a reputation on a certain way of understanding these neural patterns, and her suggestion threatened that. Not because it was wrong, but because it might be right. And if it was right, I would have to revise everything, rebuild my framework, acknowledge that I'd been seeing only part of the picture. That's when I felt it. The resistance. The way my mind kept sliding away from her idea, kept finding reasons to dismiss it, kept returning to the comfortable, familiar territory of my established theory. And I recognized that feeling. I'd felt it before, in other contexts, in my personal life, in relationships, in decisions I'd made. That feeling of knowing something is true but not wanting to look at it directly. That feeling of your brain protecting you from destabilizing information. It took me months to really sit with her alternative interpretation, months to allow my attractor state to destabilize enough to see the data fresh. And when I finally did, when I finally let go of my attachment to being right and just looked at what was actually there, I saw that she wasn't entirely right and I wasn't entirely right. The truth was more complex, more nuanced, more interesting than either of our positions. The chaos and the coherence weren't opposites or stages. They were aspects of a single dynamic process, constantly flowing into and out of each other, like the brain was breathing. That experience taught me something crucial about self-deception. It showed me that the smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing, the more sophisticated your self-deception can become. Because intelligence doesn't protect you from bias. If anything, it gives you more tools to defend your biases, to construct elaborate justifications for what you already believe. And it showed me that you can't think your way out of an attractor state. You can't use logic to escape a pattern that was formed pre-logically in the deeper structures of your neural organization. You have to feel your way out. You have to notice the resistance, the discomfort, the way your mind moves away from certain thoughts. And then you have to gently, persistently, compassionately stay with that discomfort until something shifts. Let me tell you another story. This one about a friend of mine. I'll call him Michael. Michael was a successful physician, respected in his field, happily married, by all external measures, living a good life. But he had this pattern. Every few years, he would get into conflicts at work, bitter disputes, with colleagues that would escalate until he felt he had no choice but to leave and find a new position. And every time it happened, he had a perfectly reasonable explanation. The other person was unreasonable, or the institution was poorly managed, or the politics were toxic. And the thing is, his explanations were true. The people he fought with were difficult. The institutions did have problems. He wasn't making things up. But there was a pattern he couldn't see, a role he kept playing without awareness. It wasn't until his wife, after the fourth or fifth time this happened, sat him down and said, "Michael, I love you, but you have to look at this. Every single place you've worked, this happens. Different people, different places, same outcome. Maybe it's not just them. Maybe there's something in how you engage that creates this." He told me later that his first reaction was anger, betrayal, even. He felt like she wasn't on his side, wasn't supporting him. But she held firm, lovingly, but firmly, and she asked him to just consider it. Not to accept blame, not to say he was wrong, just to consider that there might be a pattern. And slowly, over weeks and months, he started to see it. He started to notice how he would take strong positions and then become increasingly rigid when challenged, how he would interpret disagreement as disrespect, how he would escalate conflicts rather than de-escalate them, always feeling justified because he was standing up for principle, for what was right. What he discovered when he really looked deeply, was that there was a part of him that was still fighting his father. His father had been authoritarian, controlling, dismissive of Michael's thoughts and feelings, and Michael had learned early that the only way to maintain his sense of self was to stand firm, to never back down, to fight for his position. That strategy had served him in childhood. It had protected something essential in him, but it had become an attractor state, a default pattern that activated automatically whenever he felt challenged, regardless of whether the situation actually called for that response. He wasn't hiding from the conflicts themselves. He saw those clearly. What he was hiding from was his own role in creating them, and the deeper wound that was driving that role. Once he saw it, really saw it, he couldn't unsee it, and that awareness gave him a choice he'd never had before. He could feel the old pattern activating, feel that familiar surge of righteous anger when someone questioned his judgment, and he could pause. He could ask himself, is this really about this situation? Or is this about my father? Do I need to fight right now? Or is there another way to respond that honors both my truth and the other person's? He's still a strong person. He still stands up for what he believes. But he's not trapped in the pattern anymore. He has flexibility, nuance, the ability to choose his response rather than having it chosen for him by neural pathways carved decades ago. These stories point to something fundamental about how self-deception works. It's not usually about big, obvious lies we tell ourselves. It's about the frame through which we see our experience. It's about what we notice and what we don't notice. It's about the explanations that seem so obvious, so self-evident, that we never think to question them. Your brain is constantly making predictions, constantly generating expectations about what's going to happen next based on what's happened before. And then it's comparing incoming sensory information to those predictions. When there's a match, when reality confirms your expectations, your brain barely registers it. It just says, yes, as expected, move on. But when there's a mismatch, when something doesn't fit the prediction, that's when you get a prediction error signal, a surge of neural activity that says, pay attention, something unexpected is happening. Now, here's the crucial part. Your brain doesn't like prediction errors. They're metabolically expensive. They require you to update your models, to change your expectations, to reorganize your understanding. So your brain has two ways to deal with prediction errors. One way is to update the model, to learn, to change your expectations, to better match reality. But the other way is to minimize the error itself, to selectively attend to information that confirms your expectations and filter out information that contradicts them. And guess which strategy your brain prefers most of the time? The one that requires less work, less reorganization, less destabilization. The one that keeps your attractor states intact. This is why you can have the same argument with your partner over and over, and both genuinely feel like the other person is being unreasonable. You're each filtering the interaction through different attractor states, different expectations, different models of how relationships work, and you're each minimizing prediction errors by noticing the evidence that confirms you're right and not noticing the evidence that contradicts you. This is why you can keep choosing partners who are emotionally unavailable, or jobs that undervalue you, or friends who take more than they give, and genuinely not see the pattern. Your attractor states are generating expectations that make those choices feel normal, feel like just the way things are. This is why you can have a habit that's clearly harming you, that you say you want to change, and yet you keep doing it. Because at some level, at the level of your neural dynamics, that habit is part of a stable pattern, an attractor state that your brain keeps returning to because it's familiar, because it's what you know, The little sign you're hiding from yourself shows up in the gaps between what you say and what you do, between what you intend and what you actually choose, between how you see yourself and how you actually behave. It shows up in the stories you tell about your life, the way you're always the hero or always the victim. Never just a complex human being making choices with mixed motives and limited awareness. It shows up in your emotional reactions. The way certain topics make you defensive or shut down or change the subject without even realizing you're doing it. It shows up in your relationships. The way you keep attracting the same type of person, or keep having the same type of conflict, or keep feeling the same type of disappointment. It shows up in your career. The way you keep stopping just short of your goals, or keep sabotaging yourself just when things are going well. Or keep choosing security over growth, even though you say growth is what you want. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. The part that changed everything for me. You don't overcome self-deception by trying harder to see the truth. You overcome it by getting curious about your resistance to the truth. You overcome it by noticing what you don't want to notice. By feeling what you don't want to feel, by asking the questions you've been avoiding. This is where everything changes. Because when you shift from trying to be right to trying to understand, when you shift from defending your current attractor state to exploring its boundaries, you create the conditions for new patterns to emerge. Let me explain this through the lens of what I learned studying neural dynamics. In the olfactory bulb, I saw that the system needed to maintain a certain level of chaos, a certain level of flexibility, in order to recognize novel smells. If the system was too rigid, too locked into existing attractor states, it couldn't adapt to new inputs. It would just keep imposing old patterns on new stimuli, keep seeing everything through the lens of what it already knew. But if the system was too chaotic, too unstable, it couldn't form coherent patterns at all. It would just be noise, randomness, no meaning emerging from the activity. The magic happened at the edge. In that zone between order and chaos that complexity scientists call the critical state. That's where the system had enough stability to maintain patterns but enough flexibility to form new ones. That's where learning happened. Where adaptation happened, where genuine novelty could be recognized and integrated. And I believe this is true for consciousness as well. Your sense of self, your experience of being you, it exists in that same edge zone between order and chaos. You need enough stability to have continuity, to have a coherent identity, to function in the world. But you need enough flexibility to grow, to change, to see yourself and your life in new ways. When you're hiding from yourself, when you're locked in self-deception, you've tipped too far toward order. Your attractor states have become too rigid, too defended, too closed to new information. You keep imposing the same patterns on new experiences, keep telling the same stories about who you are and how life works. Keep filtering out anything that doesn't fit. And the way out is not to swing to total chaos, to deconstruct everything, to lose all sense of self. The way out is to gently, deliberately, introduce a little bit of productive instability into your system. Just enough to loosen the grip of your dominant attractor states. Just enough to allow new possibilities to emerge. This happens through what I think of as loving disruption. You disrupt your patterns, but you do it with compassion, with curiosity, with genuine care for yourself. Not with judgment, not with force, not with the harsh voice that says you should be different than you are. Let me give you some examples of what this looks like in practice. Say you've noticed that you have a pattern of avoiding difficult conversations. You tell yourself you're being kind, you're keeping the peace, you're not making a big deal out of things. And maybe that's partly true, but maybe there's also something you're hiding from yourself, some fear or belief that's keeping you silent. Loving disruption would be to notice the pattern, without judgment. Oh, interesting. I'm about to avoid this conversation again. And then to get curious. What am I afraid would happen if I spoke up? What do I imagine about myself or the other person or the relationship that makes silence feel safer than speaking? You're not forcing yourself to have the conversation. You're not telling yourself you're a coward or you're doing it wrong. You're just bringing awareness to the pattern and the beliefs underneath it. And in that awareness, in that gentle inquiry, you create a little space, a little gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, new choices become possible. Or say you've noticed that you're always busy, always productive, always moving from one task to the next. You tell yourself you're ambitious. You're making the most of your time. You're working toward your goals. And maybe that's true. But maybe there's also something you're avoiding, some feeling or question or emptiness that emerges when you stop moving. Loving disruption would be to deliberately create a little space of non-doing, not to judge your busyness, but to experiment with what happens when you stop. To sit quietly for 10 minutes and just notice what arises. To take a walk without a destination or a podcast in your ears. To see what thoughts and feelings show up when you're not distracting yourself from them. Again, you're not trying to fix yourself or change yourself. You're just testing the boundaries of your attractor state, seeing what you've been organizing out of you. Or say you have a story about why a certain relationship ended or a certain opportunity didn't work out. You've told the story many times. It makes sense. It feels true. But there's a little something, a little discomfort or defensiveness that arises when someone questions your version of events. Loving disruption would be to deliberately try on a different story. Not because your original story is wrong, but just to see what happens when you shift the frame. What if you told the story emphasizing your role instead of the other person's role? What if you told it emphasizing what you learned instead of what you lost? What if you told it from the other person's perspective? You're not replacing one fixed story with another. You're loosening the grip of any single narrative, allowing for complexity, for multiple truths, for the possibility that your experience means more than one thing. These practices, these experiments in loving disruption, they work because they align with how neural systems actually change. You can't force a new attractor state into being through willpower alone. But you can create the conditions for new patterns to self-organize by gently destabilizing the old ones, by introducing novelty, by paying attention to what you usually ignore. The neuroscientist Francisco Varela, who I had the great privilege of knowing, used to talk about this in terms of laying down a path in walking. You don't design the path first and then walk it. You walk, and the path emerges from your walking. Your neural pathways are the same. You don't decide who you're going to be and then become that person. You take actions, you have experiences, you pay attention in new ways, and a new sense of self emerges from those processes. This is so different from how most of us think about change. We think we need to figure everything out first, understand exactly what's wrong and exactly how to fix it, have a complete plan before we take any action. But that's not how complex systems work. You change by moving, by experimenting, by learning through doing. And here's the beautiful part. The brain is incredibly plastic, far more plastic than we used to think. New patterns can form at any age. Old attractor states can soften and reorganize. You're not stuck with the neural wiring you have right now. It's constantly being reshaped by your experience, by your attention, by your choices. Every time you notice a pattern instead of being lost in it, you're strengthening the neural networks associated with awareness. Every time you choose a new response instead of the habitual one, you're carving a new pathway. Every time you feel a difficult emotion, instead of suppressing it, you're updating your internal models, increasing your capacity to be with what is. This is not quick. This is not easy. But it's real. And it's available to you right now, in this moment, not someday when you're more ready or more healed or more together. The practice I want to offer you is simple but profound. I call it the practice of noticing your noticing. Throughout your day, just pause occasionally and ask yourself, what am I paying attention to right now? And more importantly, what am I not paying attention to? What am I filtering out? What's at the edges of my awareness that I keep moving away from? You might notice that when you're in a conversation, you're paying attention to what you're going to say next, but not really listening to the other person. You might notice that when you're working, you're paying attention to getting the task done, but not to how your body feels. You might notice that when you're with your family, you're paying attention to what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, but not to what's actually fine, what's actually beautiful right in front of you. And here's the crucial part. Don't judge what you notice. Don't try to immediately fix it. Just notice it. Just bring it into awareness. Because that act of noticing, that act of seeing your own attentional patterns, that's already the beginning of change. Over time, you'll start to recognize your personal signature, the characteristic ways your particular brain organizes experience, the specific flavors of your self-deception. Maybe you're someone who intellectualizes emotions, who turns feelings into abstract ideas to avoid feeling them directly. Maybe you're someone who projects your own unacknowledged qualities onto others, seeing in them what you won't see in yourself. Maybe you're someone who creates drama to avoid intimacy, or someone who creates isolation to avoid conflict. There's no universal pattern. Each of us has our own unique configuration, shaped by our genetics, our early experiences, our culture, our choices. But there is a universal process. We all have attractor states. We all filter reality through our expectations. We all have blind spots. We're all hiding something from ourselves. And we all have the capacity to wake up to our patterns, to meet ourselves with honesty and compassion, to choose awareness over automaticity. I've spent my entire career studying how brains create meaning from chaos, how patterns emerge from random activity, how order and disorder dance together in neural tissue. And the deepest lesson I've learned is this: you are not a fixed thing. You are a process, a flow, a constant becoming. The patterns that feel like your unchangeable self are actually temporary configurations, attractor states that can shift and reorganize under the right conditions. The you who is hiding from yourself is the same you who is seeking yourself. They're not separate. The mechanism that creates the blindness is the same mechanism that can create the seeing. Your brain's tendency to create stable patterns is what allows you to function, but it's also what traps you. And your brain's underlying chaos, its fundamental flexibility, is what allows you to break free. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to fix or improve or transcend yourself. You just need to see yourself more completely, more honestly, with less filtering. And in that seeing, in that fuller recognition of who and what you are, you naturally change. Not because you're trying to change, but because awareness itself is transformative. When you see that you're not actually as patient as you thought, you become more patient, not through trying, but through accepting your impatience. When you see that you're not actually as independent as you thought, that you have deep needs for connection and belonging, you become more capable of authentic relationship. When you see that you're not actually as certain as you thought, that you've been defending positions more than discovering truth, you become more genuinely curious, more open to learning. This is the paradox of self-knowledge. You become more yourself by seeing that who you thought you were was incomplete, You become more free by recognizing how conditioned you are. You become more whole by acknowledging your fragmentation. And here's what I want you to understand, what I really want you to feel in your bones. The little sign that you're hiding from yourself, that repetition without awareness, that pattern you keep living. It's not your enemy. It's not a problem to be solved. It's information. It's your brain's best attempt, given its history and its constraints, to keep you safe and functional. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to overcome it through force of will. You just need to get curious about it, to turn toward it with gentleness, to ask what it's protecting you from, what it's trying to accomplish on your behalf. And when you do that, when you meet your patterns with compassion instead of judgment, something softens. The pattern doesn't necessarily disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You're no longer identified with it, no longer controlled by it. You can see it as one possibility among many, one way your brain has organized experience, but not the only way. This is freedom, not the absence of patterns, but the ability to see them, to work with them, to consciously participate in your own becoming, instead of being passively shaped by forces you don't recognize. I'm an old man now, and I've spent a lot of time looking back at my life, at the choices I made and the choices I didn't make, at who I was and who I became and who I might have been. And what strikes me most is how much of my life I lived in partial awareness, how many patterns I enacted without really seeing them, how many years it took me to recognize things that were right in front of me the whole time. But I don't regret that. I don't wish I had woken up sooner or known better or done it differently, because I understand now that this is the human journey. We see what we're ready to see when we're ready to see it. We hide from ourselves until the cost of hiding becomes greater than the cost of looking. And then we look, and we see, and we change, and new patterns form. And eventually we'll need to see through those patterns too. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a process to be lived. And the measure of a life well lived is not whether you eliminated all your blind spots or achieved perfect self-knowledge. It's whether you remained curious, whether you kept looking, whether you met yourself with increasing honesty and decreasing judgment as the years went by. So here's what I want to leave you with today. There's something you're hiding from yourself right now. I don't know what it is. You might not know what it is, but it's there. A pattern you keep repeating, a story you keep telling, a feeling you keep avoiding, a truth you keep dancing around. And my invitation to you is not to figure out what it is, not to solve it or fix it or make it go away. My invitation is simply to get curious, to notice where your attention doesn't want to go, to feel where your resistance lives, to ask the questions you've been avoiding. What would happen if you were wrong about something you're certain of? What would change if you admitted something you've been denying? What would you have to feel if you stopped staying so busy? What would you have to face if you stopped blaming that other person? You don't have to answer these questions right now. You don't have to do anything with them. Just let them percolate. Just create a little space for them to exist in your awareness. Because that space, that openness, that willingness to not know, that's where transformation begins. Your brain will resist. Your attractor states will pull you back toward the familiar. You'll forget. You'll get distracted. You'll find very good reasons why this doesn't apply to you, or why now isn't the right time. And that's okay. That's part of the process. Just notice the resistance. Just see the forgetting. Just recognize the good reasons for what they are, protective mechanisms, ways your brain is trying to keep you stable. And then, gently, come back. Come back to the question. Come back to the curiosity. Come back to the possibility that you might not see yourself completely, that there might be more to discover, that the you you're going to become is already here, waiting to be recognized. This is the work of a lifetime. Not a project with a completion date, but a practice you return to again and again. And every time you return, you're different. You've seen a little more, understood a little more, integrated a little more. The patterns that seemed solid become more fluid. The self that seemed fixed reveals itself as dynamic. And you find that you're not who you thought you were. And that's not a loss. That's an opening. So, if this resonated with you, if something in this conversation touched something true in your experience, I want you to know you're not alone. We're all walking this path together, all learning to see ourselves more clearly, all discovering that the obstacles we thought were outside us often live in our own attentional patterns, our own neural dynamics, our own ways of organizing experience. Make sure to subscribe for more conversations like this one. Hit like to support this work, and drop a comment sharing your own experience. What's one pattern you've recognized in yourself? What's one thing you suspect you might be hiding from yourself? I genuinely love to hear from you, to know what this brings up, to learn from your reflections. Because that's the beautiful thing about this work. When you start seeing your own patterns, you start recognizing them in others. And when you meet your own self-deception with compassion, you naturally extend that compassion outward. You become less judgmental, less certain, more curious about other people's experience, more willing to hold space for complexity and contradiction and mystery. And that's how we change together. Not by becoming perfect, not by eliminating our humanity, but by seeing it more clearly, accepting it more fully, and choosing, moment by moment, to bring a little more awareness to how we're actually living, what we're actually doing, who we're actually being. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for doing this work of waking up to yourself. It matters more than you know.